the story from this week's reading selection. It's called Seal. It's by Judy Allen and it's illustrated by Tudor Humphreys. You can find the illustration for it on page 76 and 77 in your literacy book. The things that I want you to be thinking about while you're working on this reading is listening for details about the characters and events in the story and how the characters' actions or specific events help you compare and contrast ideas in the story. So you're going to be looking at what ideas might be the same to compare or what might be different to be able to contrast them, to see what's different about them. I want you to be thinking about how Jenny reacts when Stephanos tells her new facts and information and when her parents try to teach her new information. All right, so here we go. Seal by Judy Allen. One day, said Jenny, I want to know something that none of you know. She was on vacation in Greece with her mother, her father, and her big brother Joe. Every day for almost 2 weeks, the three of them had told her things. They'd told her stories about the ancient Greek gods. They'd explained how the ruined temples and broken statues had once looked. They'd shown her little white churches, huge hillside monasteries, and trees growing olives and lemons. They'd taught her how to eat an artichoke, how to recognize a swallowtail butterfly, a spider crab, and a stinging jellyfish. Now, sitting outside a cafe eating honey cakes, Jenny decided that her head was so full that it didn't have room for a single extra piece of information. Her father pointed across a small harbor to an island that rose from the sea like a miniature mountain. We must get a kaike to take us out there, said Jenny. A kaike is a kind of boat. Jenny put her hands over her ears. Don't tell me anything more, she said. You shouldn't mind us knowing more than you, said her mother. We're all older than you are. But you'll always be older than me, said Jenny. I'll never catch up. Later, down by the boats that were moored in the shallows, Jenny's father talked with 2 fishermen. The older one only spoke Greek. His son Stephanos, though, could speak English. Stephanos was friendly, but he shook his head when Jenny's father asked about a trip to the island. It's only a rock, he said. No one goes there. We'd like to have a picnic on it, said Jenny's mother. Not possible, said Stephanos. There are many other rocks under the sea around it. The bottom would be torn out of my boat. Instead, I'll take you night fishing if you'd like. We would like, said Joe. Then we go tonight, said Stephanos cheerfully. The evening sun was still making a glowing red path across the sea when they got into the boat, but Stephanos lit the lamps at once. They hissed softly as they burned. They're gas lamps, said Joe. That's why they make that sound. Jenny ignored him. They're called pyrophania, said Stephanos. That means fire crowns. Jenny smiled. She liked the name, and she found that she didn't mind Stephanos telling her things. His boat had an engine, but he didn't use it. He rowed out on the darkening sea. Jenny's mother pointed back toward the land, where 1,000 tiny glimmerings flickered among the shadowy trees. Fireflies, she said, but Jenny was looking in the other direction. I can see a silver seal, she said. Are there any seals in Greece? Asked Jenny's father. Not silver ones, said her mother. Where is it? Said Joe. It's gone now, said Jenny. Stephanos said nothing. He stopped rowing and lowered a net into the water. We may get fish here, he said. They come up to the light. There, said Jenny, half standing up and making the boat rock. There it is! Something pearly white was moving toward them, trailing shimmering streaks through the water. Jenny's right, it is a seal, said Joe. It isn't really silver, said his father as the seal submerged. There's phosphorescence in the water. He began to explain about the microscopic sea creatures that glow almost as brightly as fireflies, but Jenny wasn't listening. Where's it gone? She said. They're rare and shy, said Stephanos. I think it will go far away. Well spotted, Jen, said Joe. Jenny hardly saw the little shoal of whitebait they caught that night, or the small octopus. She stared at the sea until Stephanos rowed them back to the harbor, but the silver seal did not appear again. When she saw it the next day, it no longer looked silver. It was brown and glossy. She stood at the edge of the sea near Stephanos and his father, who were sorting their nets, and watched it through her mother's binoculars. Joe tried to interest her in a row of octopuses hanging out to dry in the sun, but Jenny took no notice of him and he wandered off. They all tell me things, she complained to Stephanos. I give you something to tell them, said Stephanos. Your seal is a monk seal. His father spoke angrily. Stephanos shook his head and pointed to the boat on the horizon. He says the seals take our fish, he explained to Jenny. I told him it's the big fishing boats that do that. The old man grumbled again. He says the seals get caught in the nets and tear them, said Stephanos. That's true, but it doesn't happen often. Do the seals get out of the nets again? Said Jenny. Sometimes, said Stephanos. Sometimes they drown. Later, Jenny got frightened and called out to Stephanos. My seal dived, she said, and he hasn't come up again. He must be caught in a net. They stay underwater a long time, said Stephanos. He's been gone longer than a long time, said Jenny. No problem, said Stephanos. There are no nets out there. He'll be fine. Then, while they were eating lunch, a pleasure boat moored near the craggy island. A rowing boat was lowered, and within minutes there were people sitting on the rocky shore. Look at that, said Jenny's father. Hey, Stephanos, if you won't take us out there, we'll ask someone else. If you must go, I take you, said Stephanos. Tomorrow, said Jenny's mother firmly, when there's no one else there. They went in the morning with a bag of food and a bundle of beach towels. The tiny island was farther away than they had realized, and this time Stephanos had used the engine. When they drew near, though, he shut it off. I cannot go closer, he said. Looking down through the clear water, Jenny saw tiny fish swimming among the dark rocks that grew out of the sandy seabed. Her father jumped out first. The water reached almost to his waist. Come on, Jen, he said. I'll give you a piggyback. Joe balanced the picnic bag on his head while his mother held the towels high. Stephanos watched them wade ashore. I'll be nearby fishing, he called. Anytime you say, I'll take you to the beautiful beach. He really doesn't like people coming here, does he? Said Jenny's father quietly. I can't imagine why. He found a flat rock to lie on while his shorts dried. Jenny's mother found a pool of sea anemones. Joe found 2 caves. The sun shone through a hole in the roof of one, but the other was shady enough to keep the picnic cool. Stephanos rowed a little way off and lowered baskets to catch squid. Jenny clambered to the top of the rock island to watch for her seal. After a little while, Joe passed her lunch up to her. Bread, crumbly goat's cheese, an enormous tomato, and some cherries. Suddenly, the seal appeared from nowhere, making her jump. It looked straight at her and then dived. This time, Jenny had a good view, and though she stared for so long that she dribbled tomato seeds down her front, it did not come up again. There must be a cave under the island, Jenny thought. She left the remains of her lunch and crossed the top of the island to the slope on the other side. She could see Stephanos in his boat, but she couldn't tell if he was watching her. Her family was too busy eating to look up. She lay on her stomach and stared down. A sleek head popped out from the water below her. For a moment she was only a couple of feet from the sad, whiskery face, and then the seal somersaulted and sent up a flurry of sand. When the sand settled, the seal was gone. You definitely have a cave, thought Jenny, but I'm not following you underwater to find it. Then she remembered Joe's first cave with the hole in the roof. Perhaps this one is the same, she thought. It didn't take her long to find the jagged opening, half hidden by a little scrubby bush. She knelt down and peered through it. At first, all she could see was a pattern of shimmering green and gold. Then she could make out a huge dim cavern with a stony floor and shelves of rock. The sun shone through the shallow sea and in at the underwater opening, lighting everything with a watery glow. There was a moment at the edge of the water that the seal appeared, hauling himself out of the water and onto the little pebbly cave beach. Higher up, where the sea did not reach, there were more seals resting, and 2 of them had babies, lying close. Jenny could hear the sighing of the sea and the soft bleating of one of the seal pups. For what seemed like 100 years she crouched there enchanted, and then she realized, at last, she knew something that not one of the rest of her family knew. She stood up and saw that Stephanos was bringing his boat closer, shouting and waving. There's a squall coming, he called. You must come. I have to get to my boat into harbor. In the rush, Jenny had no time to say anything, especially as Joe carried her out first and then waded back to help the others collect their belongings. Stephanos kept the boat steady and spoke to her softly. I know what you found, he said. Their last hiding place. I must tell you that if they're disturbed, the mothers may abandon their babies or even kill them. I didn't disturb them, said Jenny, horrified. No, said Stephanos, but will you betray them? My family wouldn't hurt them, said Jenny. Wouldn't they want to look, said Stephanos. Wouldn't they dive down just once, and wouldn't others hear of it and come out to see? But I really want to tell them, said Jenny, as the family waded toward them. I understand, said Stephanos. I give you something else to tell instead. He thought for a moment. Then, hundreds of years ago, he said, people believed that a tent made of sealskin would protect them from lightning. Jenny frowned. And they believed that if they dragged the skin of a real seal around a field, crops would not be damaged by hailstones. Jenny looked back at her family, wading out toward the boat. Will you keep our secret, said Stephanos, for the seals? Then he turned to help the others on board. The water became choppier and the rain began to fall as they traveled back. Jenny sat very quiet, very still. Someone doesn't mind the bad weather, said Jenny's father, as the seal's head broke the surface behind the boat. It's always alone, isn't it? Said her mother. I can tell you something none of you know, said Jenny. What? Said Joe. Jenny told the story about the sealskin and the lightning. What an extraordinary thing, said her mother. How did you find that out? Asked her father. Jenny looked at them, and they were all listening with interest. She couldn't remember that they'd ever done that before. I can tell you something else, too, she said. Stephanos watched her. The seal sank below the surface, leaving a ring of water. Jenny drew a deep breath, and then she told the story about the sealskin and the hailstones. That's all, she said. Stephanos smiled broadly. Believe me, he said, Jenny is wiser than you know. So that's the end of the story. So thinking back to the beginning, I want you to be thinking about how Jenny reacted differently to what her brother and her parents were trying to tell her about, to what Stephanos was trying to tell her in the story. She wanted so very badly to be able to have some knowledge of her own, but in the end, ended up helping to keep a secret to protect the animals. I hope you enjoyed the story. We'll see you next time.